Hello everybody. So I'm going to go through using Blender to make a 3D printed model. So some of you may have not used Blender before. Blender is quite similar to Maya, except for the main difference being that it's open source and it's free. So Blender is quite a good tool to use, mainly because of its accessibility. But I think it's important to point out at this point in time, Blender is not industry standard, but I still think it's a pretty good tool. And for what we need when we want to print something in 3D, Blender is fine. So when you open up Blender, you should see the following. You'll see a cube, you will see a light source, and you will see a camera. Now, because we are not actually going to be doing any texturing, any lighting, or any animation, we actually don't need any. We don't need the light source, and we don't need the camera. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to hover over. I'm going to click my camera here, and I'm going to press X, and that's going to bring up the option to delete it. I'm going to click that because we don't need it, and then I'm going to click my light source, press X, and delete that as well. So here we have our scene at the moment, and we have our cube. Let's go through just some very simple fundamentals when using Blender. For those of you who are familiar with Maya, then the kind of feel and way that you navigate around Blender is going to be quite similar to Maya. Okay, so I'm using a Mac, so some of the terminology might be different. Some of the short keys might be different. You'll have to do your own homework just to figure out what the short keys are, but they shouldn't be too dissimilar. But on your mouse, you should have three buttons. You have your left click, you have the center click, the middle clicker that kind of can make so you can scroll forward and backwards, and then you'll have a right click as well. The one you tend to use quite a lot is the one in the middle. They have that kind of scroll capability, allows you to kind of go in and out of an object. The left hand click is normally to select, so I'm clicking outside of the cube to deselect, and I'm clicking it to select. I can go in and out. So another thing that's quite important is if you press the shift key while holding down the middle button, the middle clicker on your mouse, you should be able to kind of scroll side to side. If you let go of that and do the same thing, you will sort of pivot around the object. So it might take a little bit of time right now just to kind of experiment with holding shift and middle button and moving around, and then kind of without the shift key and kind of pivoting around your object. And then why don't you try kind of zooming in and zooming out. Okay, so we have an object here. It's actually called a mesh, and it's a mesh cube. I'm going to, just like Maya, if you've used Maya, you have kind of three main things that you can do to an object. The first one is the move tool, and you should find that on the left hand side on this toolbar here, this vertical toolbar, and this one here that says move. If you click that, it'll give you the option to be able to move your mesh or your cube or your object along the Z axis, the X axis, and the Y axis. So if you hold down, click those three arrows here, they will move directly along those axes, as you can see here. If you click outside of those arrows, you will find that you kind of have a free form movement. Okay, so the short key for this is G. So if you highlight your object and you press G, you will see that you can move around. Now what is really important, and it's probably good practice to get familiar doing this, is if you press G and then say press Y and you hold down Y, it'll actually stop it from going free form and it'll move it along the Y axis. If you do the same, press G and then X, for example, it will move along the X axis. And if you do the same, press G and press Z, you'll go across the Z axis. So it gives you a little bit more control. And it's quite a handy little shortcut there instead of having to click here all the time. And as you get more proficient in Blender, you should be able to move around really quickly actually without just selecting things like this and the different axes, and you get a little bit more control and you just speed things up, which after a while is quite important once you've kind of established the basics. So that's the move. Then we have rotate, and then when you click rotate on the left hand vertical bar, you should see this essentially kind of like a ball shape around, and it'll give you some options. So if you click on the blue, move that way, click on the green, gives you that, red, yeah. So the shortcut for rotate is R, and you can do the same here by holding either the Z key, Z button for the Z axis, X button for the X axis, and the Y for the Y axis as well. Okay, and then finally you have scale. The thing you see with scale, which is where we actually start to change our object, is we can make our object bigger. And here we have it moving along the Z axis here, pushing it up, clicking and pulling, and then on the Y axis clicking and pulling, and then if you scroll around you can do the X axis clicking and pulling. Say if you didn't want to actually change the dimension, sorry about that, you wanted to change the dimension kind of equally and you scale up equally, you can go outside of that, just making sure you don't hold down any of the X axes. As you can see that. So now that has scaled in proportion. And the short key for that is S. So if you click S, it'll give you the option to scale. Again, if you hold Z, Z axis, if you hold X, X axis, and you guessed it, if you hold Y, you can scale along the Y axis. Okay. The last thing I wanted to show you for the first video is moving into edit mode. So at the moment we're in object mode, and you can see up here in the horizontal panel at the top, with your object selected, you can click on that and click edit mode. And what I wanted to show you here is this is a cube built up of vertices, edges, and faces, and I'll explain. This point here is a vertice, and again, for those of you who have used Maya, this is very rudimentary stuff, but you know, it's important to go through it again. These are vertices, and if I was to click out of that, I am on the vertices mode up here, and you can see that little cube here with a dot on it. I can click that vertices, and I can choose either rotate, scale, or move, and I can actually physically move the vertices around, which will actually start to change the shape of my cube. I'm going to go back. You can choose more than one by holding down Shift and selecting there. You see I've selected 2. If I hold down, if I hold down the Command key, which might be slightly different on a Windows, on a PC, but if I hold down the Command key, I can deselect as well. So Shift key to select more than one. So I'm holding down the Shift key. I can select multiples, and if I say I select that vertices here, and I think, oh, actually I don't want that vertices, but I do want the other 3, I can hold down Command and deselect there, which is quite useful. So those are my vertices. If we move on to edges, you'll see that an edge is the space between 2 vertice points, and I can click those, and again, like I did with my vertices, I can choose, say, something like move, and I can move that around, and I'll start to change the shape of my original object. Scale as well. Doing it like this obviously gives you a little bit more control for simpler objects, but when we get a little bit more complicated and our meshes have more vertices, faces, edges and faces, it gets a little bit more complicated, and that's probably when you switch over to the sculpting mode, but that's for another day. And finally we go to faces, and the face is the point between 3, 4, 5, 6 vertices, but normally 4, and it's the face that's kind of created in the middle, like that. So again, with the face, we can click move, and it'll expand our object, and there you go. So simple start, nice and easy. This is basically how you can move your objects around, and you learn about vertices, faces, and edges, or vertices, edges, and faces, sorry. Yeah, so in the next one we will prepare our scene, and the size dimensions of our scene to be printed on a 3D printer, as well as getting up some reference images. Okay, brilliant. See you in the next video. Bye.